Next up, we have two units we have yet to cover, EMs and REMs. It's spelled EM, but it's pronounced M. As far as I can find, it's an old term from before CSS that has to do with the width or the height of the uppercase letter M in typography. Anyway, I've always heard it as M, so there we go. Ems are relative units, as are REMs, so they are relative to some other value. And what's mildly confusing about them is that that other value changes depending on the property. So let's start with font size. On an element, if we set its font size to be 1em, it will have the same font size as its parent element. So 2ems will be twice the font size of the parent element. So let's just demonstrate that very quickly. Let's make maybe an article in here, and then put an H2 inside of that. I am H2, and then maybe a paragraph in there, lorem times 2. Okay. Then we'll hop over to our CSS, and then I'm just going to say an H2 will have a font size of 2ems. Now if I refresh here, here's our H2. It's supposed to have twice the font size of its parent element. Well, what is its parent's font size? Well, its parent is an article, and it doesn't have an explicit font size set. It's inheriting a font size. But if I give my article a font size, like, what if I say your font size is 30 pixels? Well, then our H2 will have a font size of 60. There you go. So I never set any, or I didn't change anything on the H2 itself. It's still just twice the parent's font size, but I changed the parent. So I could also say a paragraph should have a font size of, well, right now, it's going to be 1em, right? This is inheriting from the article. If I refresh, nothing changes. But if I want it to be slightly smaller than the article's font size, I could say maybe 0.8ems. Sure, it's kind of odd, but I could do that. Or I could do something like put an H3 in here. I am H3. And I want an H2 to be 2ems. I want an H3 to be maybe 1.5ems. Just like that. And I'll have a paragraph just be 1em. So I've established this relationship where this is the font size of the parent, this is 1.5 times, and this is 2 times. Kind of large for an H2 when you look at our H1 on the page, but it's not really the point of this demonstration. It's just to show you how this all works. So if I change that article font size to, 10 pixels, our paragraph is 10 pixels. This is, 15 pixels, and this is 20 pixels. 2 times, 1.5 times, and 1 times. So that's the basic concept of ems when we're working with font size. Then we have other properties. For example, padding and margin, which are actually pretty commonly used, or it's common to use ems with those properties. And in those situations, 1em is not equal to the font size of the parent or the margin of the parent. Instead, 1em is equal to the font size of the element itself. So I'll show you what I mean. Let's go back to a different, how about 20 pixels maybe? If I set maybe margin left on this H2 right here, and I set it to be 1em, so margin left 1em, what I'm actually doing is taking the current font size, whatever that's computed to be. So that will be, it looks like 40 pixels, right? 2 times the parent, which in our case, we only have one H2. So this is technically every H2, but we only have one. So 40 pixels, and then whatever that evaluates to will be our margin left. 1em refers to the exact font size of the element itself, or 2ems or 3ems would be just a multiple of that. So I'll refresh, and there you go. You can see as our font size changes, this is actually going to scale as well. So if I made this, how about 5ems? Font size is 5ems. Margin left is still just 1, but it's going to grow because as I change that font size, that margin also changes. An M in margin refers to the font size of the element, and M in font size refers to the font size of the parent. It's kind of confusing, but this can be really useful. I'll show you a quick example. If I wanted to make a button, and I wanted this button to have rounded corners. So maybe I'll just do it, where should I do it? Maybe here, button, click, me. Just like that, and then I'll select my button, and I'll give it a font size. I'll just do pixels to start. How about 30 pixels? and I want it to have some padding on the left and right. So I want it to be, I guess, 0 on top and bottom, 30 pixels left and right. Let's see what that looks like. And I want rounded corners. So we saw this earlier, border radius, and I'll set it to be maybe half of that, 15 pixels. What's that look like? Okay, so let's say I like how that looks. Yeah, the color's horrible. We could change that. Okay, and I gave it a new background color and text color. Now, what I want to show you here is that this button does not scale well at all. So if I wanted this to, grow depending on the context that it's in, like if I don't know, if I made this entire article bigger, I want the button to grow, or I want a smaller button, I want it to roughly proportionately scale. With pixels, that doesn't happen. If I change my font size to be twice as large, or even more, how about 80 pixels? It's not the same shape, right? The corners are still rounded, but it's a very slight rounding compared to before. Or if I exaggerate that even more, 200 pixels, I mean, those corners are barely rounded, versus what we had back at 30 pixels. Come on, there we are. It's pretty rounded. I mean, we could even go more if we wanted to, but I think that's fine. Now, if I use M's, I can keep things relative to the font size of the element. So I could say, I actually want this to be 1M for the font size, or maybe even, 1M's fine, sure. And then padding here will be 0, 1M, and border radius could be half of that, so 0.5 M's, half of the font size, whatever that turns out to be. So now the font size is not set in stone, neither is padding or border radius. It all depends on what the parent's font size is. And in our case, it's in an article, so it's going to be smaller. But there you go, you can see as that parent font size changes, let's see, it's 20 pixels here, so font size is 20, padding is 20 on left and right, border radius is 10. But now if my article font size grows significantly, how about 50? Our button still maintains that general shape. We still have a good amount of padding that grows in line with the font size. That border radius grows in line with the font size as well. So, okay, that's a little excessive here, but if we find that button, there you go. This is 200 pixels now. It's a very large button, and the corners are rounded appropriately. Okay, so I'm going to undo that. That was a disaster. So now I can take that button and put it anywhere else. So I could have it in this article. I could have it in an H1, which is kind of odd, and I could have it just on its own outside of the article. Its font size is going to change in each one of those situations. As you can see here, we've got a small button, a very large button, and a pretty darn big button too, and the proportions are staying roughly the same. That font size grows thanks to the fact that we're using M's for font size, but then everything else changes. It grows or shrinks depending on what that font size was evaluated to. So this is really nice, right? If we use pixels, I would have to tweak every one of these numbers. But if we use M's, things scale as that font size changes. So that's the basic idea of M's. Now in the next video, we're going to cover rems, and you'll see that maybe M's aren't always perfect. There are some issues that come up. So that's coming up next.